17 Thursday night and you're looking for the best play. Well, you're in the right spot because these are the best plays and the ones you should avoid for Thursday night. And we begin with Malik Willis, who's $8,600. It's a unique price point for a quarterback, somewhat cheap, but is it worth it? Because Willis is thought to be this project quarterback. That's what he was coming out of Liberty, and that's what we've seen so far in the NFL. You see, even in a really good matchup, the best matchup he can have against the Texans potentially last week, he doesn't even throw for 100 yards. He has multiple picks. That's the problem. But the upside, this stuff on the bottom, 7 carries, 43 yards, and a touchdown. That's what made him appealing in college at Liberty to NFL scouts, and that's why he's here right now in the NFL. And he's in a situation where he's a 10-point underdog versus a Dallas team that struggles to stop the run and mobile quarterbacks. So although the talent hasn't been there yet for Willis, at this price tag on a showdown slate, you're getting a quarterback and running back in one. Yeah, I'm going to have interest. Now, how about Dak Prescott? Dak is $10,600 here, and he is going to be facing a Titans team that's given up the second most passing yards, the third most fantasy points, and ranks bottom 3 in coverage this year. That's a nice spot for Dak, especially when we consider he's coming off of his best performance of the year. His first time over 300 yards, goes well over it, nearly 350, 3 touchdowns, even adds some rushing yards. But we can't use this as a barometer of his success. It was the first time he crossed 300 yards this year. This is still a run-first offense. And they're big favorites this week, so expect only around 30 passes. Dak has been efficient, especially in the red zone, so he can still get there for you. It keeps him in play. But if I had to choose between Willis and Dak, I would choose Willis for the price discount, but Dak Prescott's still in play, still one of the top 5 plays on the slate. But how about another guy up here? Do I prefer Dak over Derrick Henry, who's more expensive, but just by $200? Now, if Henry takes on a surprisingly bad Dallas run defense, given the talent that they have, they rank bottom 10 at stopping the run. I mean, Travis Etienne has struggled over the last couple of months, but the one time he didn't struggle was week 15 against Dallas, where he went for 127 total yards on just 21 touches. And now Derrick Henry comes to town. Against this defense, and reminder, Henry leads the league right now in carries. He's top 3 in red zone usage. He looks fantastic still, and they're relying on him more and more without Ryan Tannehill. So the answer for me between Dak and Derrick Henry, the answer is Derrick Henry. And yes, I'm completely okay playing Derrick Henry with his quarterback Malik Willis on this one-game showdown slate, given both of their cheap price tags. But would I rather have CeeDee Lamb, who has been great, over Derrick Henry? Well, let's discuss. Because Lamb comes in at a somewhat surprising price tag relative to Derrick Henry. He's $600 more, but look, you can't argue with it. Last week alone, he goes for 11 targets. He was the #1 scoring wide receiver, 2 touchdowns and 120 yards. And now this season, when Dak Prescott is the quarterback, he averages 16.7 fantasy points. That's top 10 wide receiver production. However, Dak threw a lot last week. His season high usage, of course, it led to CeeDee Lamb's season high usage as well. That's not going to be the case here as 10-point favorites. This season, as a big favorite, CeeDee Lamb averages 30% less points per game. So Lamb is still in play because it's a one-game slate. He's a great receiver who sees volume, but I prefer Derrick Henry. I prefer Dak Prescott. So those are the really expensive players in the slate. Now let's look to some of the cheaper guys, mid-range guys, so we can piece this lineup together. Let's discuss $5,400 Treylon Burks, who actually returned from injury last week, and he looks completely healthy. 50 snaps, that's 75% of the team snaps, the most on the season for Burks. Now, he only saw 3 targets, but the Titans only threw 20 times. 23 for Willis, but 3 throwaways, so 20 actual attempts. As a big underdog, you're getting an athletic, big wide receiver, seeing more usage. We've seen him in prime time have a 100-yard game already this season. So at this price point, I'm a fan of Treylon Burks and playing Treylon Burks. But would I rather have Dalton Schultz, who is more expensive, $1,200 more expensive, but is it worth it? Well, Schultz is coming off of a week where he played 63 total snaps. That ended up being 84% of the snaps. He's by far and away the clear starter out there. His usage continues to increase since his injury about 6 weeks ago. And I've pointed this out in the past for some players, but let's look at it for Dalton Schultz. He ends up running 81%, 75%, 88%, and then this past week, 85% of the routes. So he's out there on the passing plays all the time. And now you're getting him at a pretty fair price point here of $6,600. But like his teammates, Dallas doesn't have to throw all that much in this game. So you need the touchdowns here to pay off, but they're projected for 26 points. I think Dalton Schultz is a great mid-range play. If I had to choose, though, I'd save the money and go to Treylon Burks. So those are some fair price players. What about the really cheap guys? Are there any on this slate? Well, one player to consider would be another tight end on the opposite side of this game in Austin Hooper. Is he viable? Well, last week, quietly, he saw his usage increase. He played the most snaps, 2 more than Chig Okonkwo, with 30 snaps, 50% of the snaps in this game for the tight ends in Tennessee. And Hooper actually ran 7 more routes than any other tight end. Chig Okonkwo actually saw his role decrease when Treylon Burks was out there, similar to what we saw earlier this year. He just wasn't on the field as much. They used just 1 tight end instead. Now, according to the DFS blueprint, Austin Hooper is projected for just 5.2 points, but at his price tag, it's not the worst play. It's going to keep him in play as a fine punt option for you, but they still use 3 tight ends. He's nothing of a slam dunk at this price tag. If he was $1,000, yes, maybe, but at this price tag, he's just a fine play. I actually prefer both of the kickers over him. I think both of the kickers are slam dunk plays on this price, mainly because we're not going to find a lot of value as we go through this, and they're just relatively cheap with nice overall projections around 7 to 8 points apiece. I would choose the Dallas kicker who has a 10-point higher team total in Brett Maher if I had to pick one. Okay, so we've looked at some of the value. How about the upper mid-range, sort of a no man's land in this slate? And we can start by looking at $9,200 Tony Pollard, who saw his snaps last week increase because of the game script. They were trailing twice by double digits against the Eagles and had to throw more, so he came on the field. Now, so far this season with Zeke active, Pollard averages a pretty solid 14 touches and 14.8 fantasy points. Now, a lot of this production is from the fact that he has a Baker's dozen overall so far this year, touchdowns, which isn't reliable long term. And now this week he's going to face a top 3 run defense and probably isn't needed as much, at least in the passing game, because they won't be trailing like last week according to Vegas. So because of this, I think Pollard is in play. He obviously has upside, but he's not as much of a priority, especially with the other quarterbacks priced around him. Now, what about Ezekiel Elliott? Before we can answer that question, I have to tell you one thing, and that would be that these props for Thursday night look to be the best early on. We'll see when more props open up, but Derrick Henry over 80.5 rushing yards. I have him over 100 for this game on my projections. Dak Prescott, I have in the 220s. I take the under. It's inflated because of his big week last week, 255.5 passing yards. You can combine these two props on prizepicks.com and get a free bet. You put in 20, you get 20 back. You put in 100, you get 100 right back. There's a link in the description below. Just use the code SAL22. That's SAL22 for a free bet up to $100. Okay, so Ezekiel Elliott, is he a priority? Is he a better play than Pollard? Well, for one, he's cheaper than Pollard, $400 cheaper. And since returning from injury in week 11, he's averaging over 17 touches and 17 fantasy points per game, a touchdown in 8 straight games. Pretty simply put, this is top 10 production for Zeke. And at the cheaper price tag and a team is a 10-point favorite, I'm expecting nearly 20 touches in red zone usage. I actually prefer Zeke. So Zeke becomes a yes, and we're starting to fill out this upper mid-range and the upper range. Now, how about we go back to some value? And we talked about him earlier, and that's Chig Okonkwo, who's $4,800. And again, last week we saw this usage decrease for him. He saw his least snaps since week 12, which just so happened to be the last full game that Treylon Burks played before getting injured in week 13. Basically, the simple formula here is that they change their complete offense when they have a dynamic playmaker in Treylon Burks on the field, and they only resort to using one tight end, and that was Austin Hooper last week, and in general will lead to less snaps for Chig. So I actually think that he's going to be, for the most part, in a void this week. Still a talented tight end, just not on the field as much. And another player being impacted is his teammate Nick Westbrook at $4,600 because of the fact that Treylon Burks returned. Now, Westbrook still played 76% of the snaps, which is solid, but he wasn't in there on 2 wide receiver sets, means less usage overall. And Westbrook just isn't the best wide receiver anyways. Even when Treylon Burks was out, he wasn't really doing much, and now he's priced the same as the kickers. I'll just take a guaranteed 6 to 8 points out of these kickers over the 85th ranked efficiency wide receiver, who's the wide receiver 3 in a run-first offense for Malik Willis. Doesn't feel good. Instead, I'd rather have the wide receiver 2 for Dallas. And many of you probably would too because he's more expensive, but he's the only $7,000 player, and he's in a really unique price range. Everybody, as of right now, according to the DFS blueprint, is playing more Dalton Schultz than Michael Gallup. They're playing more Malik Willis than Michael Gallup. He's kind of in this no man's land of the price range and the ownership as it stands. Now, very quietly last week, he actually ran one more route. He led Dallas, ran more routes than CeeDee Lamb. He looks to be 100% completely healthy after he was limited a couple of weeks back, still trying to fight back from this injury. And these routes led to 7 targets last week, 20% of the team's targets. He's out there seeing deep targets. Now, through 12 games played, he has 12 deep targets. And he faces a Tennessee team that ranks top 5 in big plays allowed to the wide receiver position. A pretty good recipe here. So here's the deal. Most projection systems, including mine, will say that he's not a great play at this price tag, but when you factor in the low ownership, I think Michael Gallup is a great play because everybody around him, from Zeke to Willis to Schultz, they're all going to be higher owned. Heck, even Treylon Burks might be higher owned. It makes him a nice lower owned play when we know he has a lot of upside. Now, a player who is lower owned, he's around 10 to 12% owned in the DFS blueprint, but shouldn't even be that highly owned, the worst player on the slate in my opinion, well, that'll be the former Colton T.Y. Hilton. And he's not a bad play because of talent or anything like that. I love to see him catch that deep target last week. He saw 12 total snaps, only 5 routes run, but he had that one deep target that he converted on. But our issue here is that the dude is $4,400. Come on, he's going to go out there and he's going to run 4 to 6 routes. He's not going to overtake Noah Brown. He's still going to remain the wide receiver 4 on a team that's a 10-point favorite, going to run the ball a lot. We are lucky, in my opinion, to get one, at most 2 targets from T.Y. Hilton, and I'm not expecting it to be a 40-plus yard bomb yet again. Even in a good matchup, I don't want to see any T.Y. Hilton here. I much prefer the kickers. Now, if we go up in the price tag a little bit, another Cowboys receiver is pretty interesting. Noah Brown's just $5,200 this week. And look, last week he only saw 2 targets, but he did play 75% of the snaps. And let's remember what he did just the week before that. He scored 2 touchdowns on 9 targets, a very solid 9 targets. I'm not expecting 9 targets this week, but this is just to say that any week it could happen for him. He did this in a good matchup against Jacksonville, and now he has a good matchup against Tennessee at a fair price point and lower ownership. Because of that, I'm interested in Noah Brown. He's not a screaming yes like maybe a Treylon Burks is, but how about Robert Woods? Would I rather have Robert Woods, who's actually cheaper at a price tag of $5K flat and will definitely come in lower owned, even though he continues to lead the Titans wide receivers in not only snaps, but but also routes running 2 more than Treylon Burks last week. Now, the issue is he just hasn't been good this year, and we can cut him some slack. He's 30 years old coming off of a torn ACL. And though we can cut him some slack, it's tough to play him as he's 82nd in wide receiver efficiency. His accuracy this year from both Malik Willis now and Ryan Tannehill ranks 95th, so he's not getting accurate passes. It's not a high upside passing offense. Treylon Burks is now back. I think at 5K flat, he's touchdown or bust. He will be lower owned, but a lower ceiling according to the DFS blueprint. So Robert Woods remains in play. If I had to choose between Noah Brown and Robert Woods, I'm going to be taking, believe it or not, here, Noah Brown. And now let's discuss some of this value at the bottom. You actually have a running back down here at $3,000 flat, Hassan Haskins, who last week he played 15 snaps. That's 25% of the snaps. The issue, 0 carries. Now, he did see 2 targets. He played on some 3rd and longs, but when Derrick Henry is active, Derrick Henry seeing 20 to 25 touches, and whoever the backup is outside of Dontrell Hilliard this year is usually seeing zilch, zada, 0. So I can't sit here and say that I would be recommending Hassan Haskins for you. How about these other guys? $2,400 Jake Ferguson. The guy ran 7 routes, saw 1 target last week. Dalton Schultz role is increasing. No, thank you. How about Chris Conley, a wide receiver 4 on a team? Yeah, they're going to have to pass in this game, but he's a wide receiver 4 who only ran a couple of routes last week. And again, Malik Willis is the quarterback. It's a pretty interesting slate as it comes to the upper range and really that mid-range of guys in there, the running backs and Zeke and Pollard and some of those receivers and tight ends. But when it comes down to the value outside of Austin Hooper, it's just these kickers and then also the defenses. I like both defenses because they're so cheap and there's a lack of value. I think the Titans are a better defensive play than the Cowboys, who look a little bit more expensive. When you're talking about the players around the Cowboys defense, yeah, you're getting legit dudes. Guys like Treylon Burks who are cheaper and go for a 100-yard game. Dalton Schultz touchdown upside, right? Michael Gallup, these types of guys. I'd rather just have those players over a defense. But down here, yeah, I'm going to take the defense over a backup running back who might see 2 touches or a tight end who might not even see a target. Now, these are the guys you want and don't want, but how does the really expensive wide receiver compare to the mid-range running back? Well, that's exactly what the DFS blueprint does and more for you. It shows you exactly who the best plays are, the most optimal plays, the best leverage because of lower ownership, and more. You can use a lineup optimizer to put it all together. Link down below on Patreon. You can join over the 1,000 people in our community using the DFS blueprint, interacting in the Discord, and a whole lot more. Just check it out with the link in the description below. The DFS blueprint. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Best of luck on this Thursday slate, and Happy New Year, beautiful people.